This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick update on the markets we track on the program. So indices in the United States slamming into record levels yet again. The Nasdaq, for example, that's up at least 16.5% so far in the year. It's gone as high as 15,051 so far today. The S&P 500 up nearly 20% over the same period, going as high as 45,001 points. In East Africa, the Nation Media Group reported its half-year numbers today. It swung back into profitability, reporting pre-tax earnings of $3.7 million. The interesting part, though, is that now e-paper sales are accounting for at least 20% of circulation revenue. 2020 was a bad year, but that certainly was a highlight for that firm. Here's what's coming up tonight. South Africa's economy is 11% larger after the country's statistics agency finished a rebasing exercise. Zimbabwe plans to increase its strategic grain reserve to 1.5 million tons. And China's logistics sector maintains growth in the first 7 months of 2021. Our starting point at this hour is with Africa's youngest country. The International Monetary Fund has approved a $334 million loan for South Sudan, geared towards improving the country's ailing economy. Now, that allocation is part of the global issuance of $650 billion worth in special drawing rights, which the IMF is distributing to members in proportion to their shares in the fund. South Sudan is expected to use that money to offset the adverse impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, to address the urgent balance of payments needs and improve its foreign reserves position as well. South Sudan's real economic output is expected to contract this year by around 1.1% as a result of pandemic-related declines in revenues generated from oil. Oil revenues account for roughly 80% of total government revenue. At 19%, South Sudan's inflation rate is the highest in Eastern Africa. On to Zimbabwe now. The country will be using more than half of the $961 million it's been allocated by the IMF in this latest issuance of SDRs to support its beleaguered currency. The government effectively abandoned a one-to-one peg between a precursor of this reintroduced Zimbabwean dollar that you were referring to it as bond notes back then, and the greenback back in February 2019. The currency is now trading at 85 to the dollar and even lower on the parallel market. Now, a plunge of that nature has made it particularly difficult for the government to get it accepted locally, and it's generally not tradable outside the country either. Zimbabwe's Finance Minister, Professor Mthuli Ncube, said that the rest of the SDRs will be used to support the acquisition of COVID-19 vaccines, investments in schools, hospitals, roads, and other government priorities. In East Africa, Kenya and Tanzania have set a December deadline to resolve 34 trade disputes highlighted by businesses from both countries in June this year. That decision follows a 5-day meeting in Nairobi of the Joint Commission on Cooperation. That bilateral organ is made up of officials from both Kenya and Tanzania. It was set up to resolve issues affecting bilateral trade and investment. Now, the committee identified 60 tariff and non-tariff barriers between the two countries back in June, and that came a month after the Tanzanian President, Samia Suluhu Hassan's visit to Kenya. Among those resolved now is a customs clearance of soft drinks made in either country, the removal of inspection fees on processed products with a standardization mark, including wheat flour, and the elimination of roaming charges following Tanzania's entry into the common network area. On to Africa's most industrialized economy now. South Africa's economic size is actually a lot bigger than previously estimated, as according to the latest data coming out from Statistics South Africa. Last year, its economic output was actually 11% larger, so that translates to an extra $37 billion worth of output. Published updated estimates show that the contribution of personal services to GDP was much bigger than that of the government services sector. Statistics South Africa also found that the finance, real estate and business services sector are still the largest industries in the country. The survey found that household expenditure was 16% higher than estimated, with spending on recreation and culture, as well as restaurants and hotels, much bigger than previously calculated. Some more grim news in South Africa, though. Police over there have launched a manhunt following the shooting of a provincial health department official on Monday. Babita Deokaran was shot outside her home in the south of Johannesburg just after she had dropped off her children at school. She died in hospital hours later. Deokaran was the chief director for financial accounting in Gauteng's Department of Health at the time of her passing. She was also part of the team of witnesses assisting the Special Investigations Unit, the SIU, with a probe into $22 million worth of PPE deals with the department. WhatsApp messages revealed that the slain health official had faced intimidation and bogus misconduct charges as she tried to raise the alarm about this bogus expenditure within the department. Let's examine this story in a bit more detail. Angela Coppola joins us now live from Johannesburg. Angela, what more do we know about the probe into this shooting?
Well, as you know, it took place on Monday, so it's still early days. But police initially said that the murder was most likely a hit or an assassination. They haven't made, at that point, a direct or firm connection between her work and the shooting at the moment, or at least they aren't saying anything about it at this early stage of the investigation. But we do know that the Special Investigating Unit, the SIU, is also involved in the investigation into that hit or alleged hit. So it means that it's being taken seriously, and there probably is a link between what she was talking about and her death. Ramah?
Tell us more about Babita Deokaran and how she ties into this probing of the issuance of tenders for personal protective equipment in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, in fact, we've heard from the Special Investigating Unit spokesperson, Kaiser Khanyago, and that she was, in fact, a witness in that investigation into those corrupt PPE deals in the Gauteng Health Department. Khanyago says that Deokaran, in fact, a 30-year veteran of that health department in Gauteng, was also involved in other investigations related to fraud and corruption in that department because she'd been there for 30 years, so knew how it worked. And she'd been assisting the SIU for some time before those PPE cases were exposed. There are also, as you mentioned just now, reports that she was facing disciplinary charges which mysteriously disappeared when the PPE tender scandal was exposed and the health MEC Bandile Masuku resigned. So there looks like she did have some information. She was a whistleblower. She was working with the SIU, and she probably had some good evidence as well, apparently. Ramah?
So the SIU, just pulling back to slightly here to look at the bigger picture, the SIU had made some 38 referrals to the National Prosecuting Authority for the prosecution and charging of state officials involved in these dodgy tenders. Has any progress been made in those cases?
Well, in fact, in June, the SIU said that it handed over 102 cases related to that PPE procurement scandal nationally, and that was to the NPA, the National Prosecuting Authority, and that was for possible prosecution. At that stage, they were also referred to some 88 state officials for disciplinary action. And then just yesterday, we heard that there were 2 senior Northern Cape health officials who were granted bail in a 43 million rand PPE procurement fraud case dating back to last year as well. And in Gauteng this week, in fact this last week, 2 suspects and a company representative appeared in court. And this follows allegations of a tender fraud at the National Health Laboratory Services, and that amounted to around 14 million rand. So it appears that the Hawks are progressing cautiously, and they're kind of dotting all their I's and crossing all their T's to make sure that they get those prosecutions.
And the numbers here do sound staggering, because by the first quarter, the state had spent over 30 billion rand, that's roughly $2 billion, just in pandemic-related expenditure. But do we have a picture of how much of that expenditure was questionable or wasteful at this point?
Well, look, the SIU describes the scale of the corruption as completely unprecedented. They, in fact, estimated recently that it was probably in the region of, estimate they say, about 3 to 3.5 billion rand. That's about $160 million. They've investigated contracts worth around 13 billion rand as well, involving 2,500 PPE contracts, awarded to around 1,700 service providers. They've also finalized investigations into 164 PPE contracts, which are valued at another 3.5 billion rand. And it appears that there are now 1,500 deals worth 6.8 billion rand that are also under scrutiny. So there's a lot of money that's being spent. And then, of course, there's the 1.6 billion rand spent by the South African police services themselves, which the Democratic Alliance says was irregularly spent too. But whatever the outcome of the investigations, the SIU expects to have completed its work by the end of August, which is next week. And then it's up to the Hawks to do their job and to prosecute people who and where it's warranted. Raman.
Indeed, let's see who actually does end up behind bars. Angela Coppola there live in Johannesburg. Now, South Africa, Nigeria and Kenya have maintained their lead as the top 3 market contributors to e-commerce in Sub-Saharan Africa. According to a report published by the global payments firm Visa, e-commerce users in the region went up by 5% last year, buoyed by pandemic restrictions in all of these economies. CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy now reports.
COVID-19 pandemic has driven hundreds of customers to e-commerce and digital payment usage. Now, e-commerce sales are projected to grow to $7 trillion globally by 2024. Now, according to Visa's white paper, e-trade advancement across sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, Kenya and Nigeria topped the list. Now, South Africa recorded the largest volume of e-commerce in 2019 and 2020. Digital access is primarily driven by mobile phone penetration, standing at 176%, internet access at 62%, and mobile money account holders accounting for 19% of the South African population. In Nigeria, bank accounts largely drive financial access, with cash transactions prevalent across much of the country. Now, mobile phone coverage stands at 83% of the country's population. Now, 42% internet access, and only 6% of Nigerians hold a mobile money account. In Kenya, digital payment channels and digital infrastructure are top drivers of e-commerce. Now, data from the report show that the usage of electronic payment instruments like mobile money is dominant. 73% of the Kenyan population hold mobile money account, with 98% mobile phone connectivity and 43% internet coverage. Now, other key factors driving e-commerce in sub-Saharan Africa are card usage. Now, card preference appears to be strongly driven by general market preferences, with the highest uptake reported in Kenya. Back to you.
CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy there. Time now for a run through some company headlines. Picking up on that e-commerce theme, South Africa's Massmart says it's in advanced talks to buy a controlling stake in the grocery delivery service OneCart. Comes as it's setting its sights on e-commerce growth. OneCart has partnered with numerous retailers, including Pick n Pay and Woolworths. According to Massmart, the company has achieved a year-on-year growth of 400% since its inception. OneCart was set up in 2016. It launched in the public domain in 2018. TikTok, you might have heard of that particular social media outfit. It's moving into e-commerce now. The social media platform has announced that it's piloting a new in-app shopping experience as part of its ongoing partnership with the e-commerce platform Shopify. TikTok shopping will allow select merchants in the United States, Canada and the UK to add a shopping tab to their profile and create a mini storefront for customers to purchase their products. Credit Suisse has pushed back the date from which it will require all US staff to get back to the office to October the 18th. That comes as concerns about the COVID-19 Delta variant to continue to grow. An internal memo sent to staff last week shows that a September 7th return to office date remains in place for vaccinated workers. Those who have already come back to the office have been told to continue to come in. And finally, Airbnb has announced plans to provide free housing to some 20,000 Afghan refugees. The firm says it will work closely with NGOs and its non-profit arm, Airbnb.org, which provides housing to people in need following natural disasters and other crises. Airbnb has not confirmed where or for how long it does plan to house these refugees. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. 15 minutes into the hour, here's what's coming up. We'll explore the flow of Kenyan tea exports to Afghanistan, given the recent change in government in the country. And e-commerce is growing in Ghana as more and more people get online. The details coming up shortly.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Naro.
This
Well, of course.
is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's talk about tea now. The East African Tea Traders Association says that the ongoing political turmoil in Afghanistan has not disrupted tea exports to the country so far. But the sector regulator is also warning that instability over there could tip volumes in the long term. Tea is still getting into the Afghan market through the open Pakistan border. The commodity accounts for roughly 30% of Kenya's exports into Afghanistan. Kenya's tea exports into the Asian nation, however, have been declining significantly over the last decade. Between January and May this year, Kenya's export volumes to Afghanistan fell by 74%. Now, that decline is largely attributed to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. But overall, the volumes have fallen steadily. Back in 2012, the country exported tea worth at least $120 million to Afghanistan. Last year's number, just $32 million. All right then, so clearly there's a massive change going on around here. So what exactly is happening with Kenyan tea exports into Afghanistan, and what does the outlook look like for that commodity going forward? Let's explore that in a bit more detail. Edward Mudibo is the Managing Director of the East African Tea Traders Association. He joins us now live on the program. Edward, good to have you on the program tonight. So give us a sense of what the current status of tea exports into Afghanistan are like at the moment.
And actually, as indicated, Afghanistan had been a very key market for the Mombasa tea auction over the years. In fact, Afghanistan was the fourth in terms of market share after Pakistan and Egypt and the UK. The fourth position was Pakistan between 2011 and 2015. And the quantum in terms of production was about 44 million kilos between that period. This fell down to about 9 million kilograms in 2017 and further dropped to about 9 million in 2019. So there has been a significant drop in terms of quantity of tea exported to Afghanistan, and possibly because of the porous borders between Pakistan and Afghanistan, there's a likelihood that still that tea is accessed through Pakistan.
Okay, so is that the general trend that we're seeing at the moment, where essentially we're seeing a lot more volumes going into Pakistan, so perhaps some of that is essentially just being repackaged and sold across the border?
That is a possibility, and certainly it should be the case, because we have to appreciate that tea is both a beverage and a food item. Notwithstanding the current situation, the current crisis, the populace still require tea. So they have to get it from some source.
Okay, so moving forward, though, the Taliban, of course, are now running the country, well, big chunks of the country anyway. But at the same time, they're mostly cut off from the global financial system. And tea is a commodity that we essentially buy in the US dollar. So how would buyers from Afghanistan end up paying for Kenyan tea that they buy in Mombasa?
That's actually where the dilemma will be. The exports can be done, but unless the exporters of tea get paid, then there is no way they can continue supplying tea to Afghanistan. That poses a challenge. And we've seen that happening in other countries whereby there are embargoes. Because the problem is not the export of tea per se. The problem comes in terms of payments. So unless the payments are assured, the exporters will be a bit lukewarm or shy to make further exports to Afghanistan. It's a situation we have to watch. Yes.
Just to be clear at this point, has there been any formal communication or any sort of embargo put in place, say from the US Treasury saying, look, don't do any kind of trade. If there's any dollar trade that we see going through to Afghanistan, we're not going to accept that?
That so far, nothing has come up or to that extent. The only situation has been with Iran and not Afghanistan so far. So far, so good. We've not received any kind of indication that there will be such sanctions.
So assuming that we do end up with sanctions of some sort, therefore, how will this trade then evolve? Should we expect volumes into Pakistan to essentially rise to sort of camouflage that cross-border trade that we spoke of earlier?
That is that's a likelihood that there'll be more of cross-border trade between Pakistan and other countries that access teas from the East African market.
Okay, so how do you manage legal liabilities then? Because this granted, it's a fast-moving situation. We're not clear on how exactly this is going to play out eventually. So as a tea traders association, how are you managing potential liabilities arising from, say, Afghan buyers showing up and saying, hey, we'd like 1 million kilograms of, fine Kenyan tea?
And in such situations, of course, the buyers would be cautious and ensure that they receive upfront payment for any transactions to deal with Afghanistan. There's no one who want to be exposed in such kind of scenario. You cannot export with anticipation of later payment in such circumstances. So that would be the kind of situation we expect.
All right, we'll see how this...
Hopefully this matter should be resolved sooner than later. And if there is stability, then it will give assurance to exporters to continue dealing with Afghanistan.
Well, fingers crossed. Let's see how that plays out. Edward Budibo, Managing Director of the East African Tea Traders Association. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Now, away from the business of trading tea, let's head over to Ghana. A lot more people in the West African oil, cocoa and gold producer are getting online, and e-commerce as a result is booming in the country. Online shopping has grown rather quickly in the West African nation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And now analysts are saying the sector could grow even further if data costs fall. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
Linda Fantevi sells products for babies and mothers in this shop, but she says most of her sales are done online through social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram and Snapchat.
For instance, on Facebook, you would have to put your product out there. So once the product is there, the potential customer sees it and then gives you a call. Okay, so once the call comes through, you also call back the customer and then you do your arrangements, and then the dispatch will then give the product to the customer and then payments will be done.
The number of people shopping online has grown in Ghana due to the COVID-19 pandemic. During the lockdown period, consumers often avoided physical shops to limit the spread of infections. The restrictions have been eased, but Linda says her customers still prefer to buy her products online instead of walking into the shop. She now wants to focus more attention on marketing online. While e-commerce is gradually being accepted in Ghana, there are concerns about people being defrauded when they try to buy things online. Sometimes they do not receive items they've paid for using mobile money services. Linda says she had to come up with a different strategy for her online shop.
They would want to see the item before they pay. So once you are also willing to let your dispatch go, deliver the item and take the money, they are good to go.
Analysts believe there is a potential for online shopping to thrive in Ghana. The country has more than 15 million people of its 30 million population using the internet.
The more people that get access to the internet, the more we are going to see the momentum that we are seeing in the e-commerce space go up. But then again, it's not just accessibility to the internet. To be able to afford it is one of the key areas that we need to look at.
Linda Fantevi agrees cheaper internet can boost her online business. She hopes to create her own website to grow her online shop. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Now, the East African region lost more than $4.8 billion and more than 2 million jobs right across the tourism sector last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. A report out earlier this month on the impact of the pandemic on selected sectors like tourism and hospitality, light manufacturing, as well as agriculture and food security, found that some 4.2 million foreign tourists were not able to travel to their preferred destinations within the East African community. And that impact has also been felt across affiliated industries and other sectors of the economy as well. Tourism is one of the leading foreign exchange earners and one of the fastest growing sectors in the region. The majority of the tourists do originate from Europe, the US and parts of Asia. The study also shows that bed occupancy rates in hotels dropped significantly during the pandemic.
You saw the numbers, not only in terms of the state, but also in terms of employment level, from around 4 million people who are being employed in the tourist sector to 2 million, almost 50% loss of employment. Given the number of measures that the region has put in place, we are observing a kind of a V-shaped recovery in the tourist sector because now the airlines are moving, of course, observing the COVID rules and the protocols. So there are some positive signs in terms of recovery, but it's still low. When you speak to the tour operators as well as the hotel operators, it is still at a very low level.
One of the things that the respondents in the study also said is that if they're going to recover, they need a range of incentives from governments across the region. And one thing that keeps coming up and time again is the need for tax breaks. But those tax breaks haven't really been sustained throughout this entire crisis. Why are governments reluctant to give these tax breaks to a sector that clearly is on its knees?
Yeah, you are right. In terms of the tax rate, creating tax incentive, let us also appreciate our governments. When you look at the numbers, we have a growing trade deficits, and some of our current account position does not reflect well. We depend entirely on tax revenues to provide public goods, to build schools, to build the health centers. And now, given the unprecedented impact of COVID, the need for substantial government revenue, again, to boost and support the health-related interventions. Of course, our government are looking into that. Of course, with support from multinational organizations like IMF and World Bank. The negotiations are ongoing in terms of ensuring that once we reduce the tax, there will be no gaps in terms of providing the required public goods. So
right. So is the issue here? So is the issue here the fact that for these governments, they're saying, look, we've got all these needs that we need to deliver on in terms of healthcare, infrastructure, and therefore we cannot afford as governments to give you these tax breaks now, even though your employment has fallen by 50% and you're looking at billions of dollars in lost revenue?
Yeah, I think you're right. As I said, that the developing countries, our economies are in they are in the phase of developing. They are not like the developed countries where they have sufficient or strong fiscal stimulus packages. So you saw, like in the US, they pumped in a lot of money to boost the sectors. They pumped around, if you look at the US government, they pumped around $600 billion to support the recovery of SMEs. We don't have that fiscal muscle in our region. However, having said that, again, the EAPC is working with the government and other development partners to ensure that there are measures which doesn't require a lot of fiscal packages that can be put in place. It may be like now harmonizing the testing. We've put in place a policy paper on open sky policy, where the landing costs for our airlines is very high. If the government can reduce or eliminate the landing costs.
We've been hearing these arguments from the sector, from tourism players in Uganda, in Kenya, in Rwanda, in Tanzania for years now. They've kept saying, look, we need to operate essentially as one market East Africa, instead of saying let's market Uganda, let's market Kenya, let's market Rwanda separately. And for years, that hasn't happened. Now we're in the middle of this crisis, and yet governments, it seems, are simply not moving with any sense of urgency to implement these policies. Why is that the case?
Yeah, the integration and aligning the policy is a gradual process. And really, we need to appreciate what so far the EAC as a region, what they have done. We do have a single tourist visa. It is working across the region. It is being used. And when you look at the number pre-COVID situation, the growth of tourism sector was strongly backed by those measures, including a single tourist visa across the region. So there has been a lot of measures that has been undertaken. But again, having said that, we need to do more. We need to double our efforts in terms of boosting the sector.
My conversation there with John Bosco Kalisa, CEO of the East African Business Council. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. China's logistics sector maintains its growth in the first 7 months of 2021. And bilateral trade between Afghanistan and India has come to a halt after the Taliban takeover.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's recap some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Uganda, the East African nation has received the first batch of evacuees from Afghanistan headed there. Officials say 51 people will be stationed in Uganda on a temporary basis until the United States and other nations resettle them permanently. The evacuees include men, women and children. They have reportedly undergone security screening and a COVID-19 quarantine procedure. Uganda nationals in Afghanistan were also meant to arrive on the same flight, but they were unable to do so due to challenges in getting access to the airport in Kabul. At the same time, the United Nations says it's alarmed by the deep divisions that still persist in Libya. The United Nations support mission for that North African state recently expressed concern about the abduction of Rida Freitas, the Chief of Staff at the office of the First Deputy Prime Minister of the Government of National Unity. Freitas is affiliated to the Eastern Libyan bloc, was released after 2 weeks in the hands of his abductors. Nigeria's drug regulatory agency has now approved the Chinese-made Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccine for use in the country. Nigeria has been allocated 7.7 million doses of the vaccine through the COVAX scheme. Authorities say the vaccine will arrive in the weeks to come. And finally, Somalia's government is urging citizens to get vaccinated amid a low uptake of the COVID-19 vaccines available in the country. Since the 11th of August, less than 100,000 Somalis have gotten any kind of COVID-19 vaccine. And that's despite the country getting over 1 million vaccine doses from countries like the United States, China, France and the UK. The country is also facing a surge in new COVID infections. That's a run through your headlines. Let's step away from the continent for the time being. China's logistics sector continues to recover in the first 7 months of the year. The industry transported goods worth nearly 180 trillion yuan, that's roughly $28 trillion, between January and July, 14% more compared to last year. Logistics companies also saw a large increase in revenue, up 21%. Analysts say that the sector was less active in the month of July. This was due to the summer heat, floods and a resurgence in COVID cases in parts of China. But overall, the logistics sector is still on a broad recovery path, driven by industrial materials and consumer goods. The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the G7 member states have essentially agreed on how to deal with the Taliban, with the condition being that the group must allow safe passage for Afghans who want to leave the country, even after the August 31st. Caroline Malone has more from Washington.
They didn't get the results they were hoping for. G7 leaders, including France, Britain and Germany, held a video call with the US President Joe Biden as frantic evacuations of their citizens and Afghan allies continue from Kabul. After the meeting, Biden said he's not extending an August 31st deadline to get US troops out of Afghanistan.
We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops. But the completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate.
UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson and other G7 members had wanted the US to extend the deadline to ensure a level of security to get their own citizens and Afghan allies out on flights. European leaders have also repeatedly emphasised how important it is for the Taliban to let people out, even after the deadline.
The number one condition we're setting as G7 is that they've got to guarantee right the way through August the 31st and beyond, safe passage for those who want to come out. Now, someone will say that they don't accept that, and some of them, I hope, will see the sense of that, because the G7 has very considerable leverage, economic, diplomatic, and political.
G7 leaders also discussed how they'll deal with the Taliban going forward, but there are already concerns over whether the Taliban will respect international relations. From the Taliban's perspective, the US made an agreement to be out by August 31st, and its leaders say if that doesn't happen, the US will face unspecified consequences. US President Biden said they are on track and have already evacuated more than 70,000 people from Kabul since August 14. But there are believed to be thousands more Americans waiting to be airlifted out, as well as many Afghans that want to be evacuated, all with a deadline of 1 week. Caroline Malone, CGTN, Washington.
Bilateral trade between Afghanistan and India has come to a virtual halt after the Taliban took power. Now, while most of Afghanistan does remain shut off to the outside world, the absence of Afghan goods is about to have an impact on the Indian market. Bilateral trade between the two sides is estimated to be worth about $1.5 billion. The Taliban have stopped the movement of cargo through Pakistan into India, and all imports have pretty much stopped. Both the traders and the consumers are bearing the brunt of it all, as Ravinder Bala finds out.
Mujahid Safi, one of the largest exporter of dry fruits from Afghanistan, is a worried man these days. He will lose millions of dollars this season as the trade route to India is closed. It is the peak trading season. The products are all packed and ready to be exported, but the turmoil in Afghanistan is already affecting exporters like Safi. India imported 85% of dry fruits from Afghanistan in the last year. The Indian market is already seeing a twofold jump in the prices.
During the festival of Diwali, the customers will not get good quality dry fruits as most of the stock we have is over. Leftover stock is not a good quality. They will have to pay 50 times more for what is available. We are not expecting new stocks as the banking facility is also not available.
The Indian exporters are also impacted. In last fiscal year, India's export to Afghanistan was worth $825 million. But in the present scenario, there are a number of concerns among the exporters.
Our only concern has been how the trade will move forward, and we are advising exporters also to look forward in certain way. You all know that at this point of time, the currency of Afghanistan has depreciated sharply. In fact, in last 1 week, Afghani currency has moved from $80 to $1 to 86 to $1, a sharp depreciation of around 7%.
With the festive season around the corner, the business community wants the government to intervene or else the bilateral trade will end and the customer will have to pay more. Ravinder Baba, CGTN, Delhi.
Onto the United States now. American lawmakers have given the green light to President Joe Biden's $3.5 trillion budget blueprint. That deal was arrived at on Tuesday after long hours of standstill. Some moderate lawmakers had demanded that the House of Representatives first approve a near $1 trillion bipartisan package of other public projects. As a compromise, the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi promised to vote on the package by late September. Mr. Biden has called the budget vote a big step in pushing forward the American economy.
Today, the House of Representatives has taken a significant step toward making a historic investment that's going to transform America, cut taxes for working families, and position the American economy for long-term growth. Our economy has added 4 million jobs in my first 6 months in office. Economic growth is up to the fastest it's been, the fastest rate in 40 years, and unemployment is coming down. Right now, our economic growth is leading the world's advanced economies. But to win the future, we need to take the next step. Today, the House of Representatives did just that.
Booster shots will soon be available for those who have received the two-shot Moderna and Pfizer COVID-19 vaccinations in the United States. For those who received the single-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine, however, there's still no formal word yet, as CGTN's Mark New now explores.
Earlier this year, getting a COVID-19 vaccine appointment was tough. So when the Johnson & Johnson single shot became available, Carrie Stockstead jumped at the chance to get it.
That was really scary for me, frankly, because I felt like I already knew that people had gotten COVID within the apartment complex, and so just being able to get the vaccine was important.
Last week, U.S. health officials announced booster shots will be available starting September 20th for those vaccinated with the mRNA shots from either Pfizer or Moderna. But so far, no word for those who got the J&J.
The real concern I have is that there's really no information about it quite yet.
But with the approval of the San Francisco Department of Health, Zuckerberg's San Francisco General Hospital recently decided to move a step ahead. It's offering supplemental doses of Pfizer or Moderna to those who receive the J&J shot as long as they first consult with their doctor.
This was rare to go ahead of the CDC, and actually the CDC ended up writing the San Francisco Department of Public Health because they wrote me, and then I put them in touch with the SFDPH. And I said, I think everyone should talk about this so that everyone can get on the same page.
Gandhi says San Francisco saw early hints that breakthrough infections were more common with those who had the J&J vaccine. She believes supplementing the J&J vaccine, known as an adenovirus-based vaccine, with an mRNA shot is safe.
Well, that's really from a mix, what we call a mix and match trial with another adenovirus DNA vaccine, which is the AstraZeneca vaccine, which looks like Johnson & Johnson, but it's different. And there was a trial that looked at AstraZeneca and then matched with the Pfizer vaccine. And it looked like not only were antibodies higher, but that it was completely safe.
Johnson & Johnson is already studying the effectiveness of a J&J booster in what's known as the Ensemble 2 trial.
And because they're studying in the context of Delta, because their Ensemble 2 actually happened, later in the spring. And so there's going to be people who were exposed to Delta. I actually think we have to wait and see what that data shows.
Gandhi says there's been plenty of criticism about there being no specific studies on the J&J shot combined with a booster from Pfizer or Moderna. The problem is those vaccines come from for-profit companies which are unlikely to work with each other. That's why the work going on at San Francisco General Hospital could prove to be valuable in more ways than one.
One good thing is since San Francisco General started this, we will be able to get some real-world observational data.
Everybody had to take a risk by, getting vaccinated and, having as much data as possible, but now we have some time, and I think that that's what the vaccines have provided, so I'm willing to wait.
U.S. health officials say they expect to have more data on J&J's booster trials in the next several weeks. Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
Still on American healthcare policy issues, California has become the first state in the U.S. to require all teachers and staff in public and private schools alike to either get vaccinated or undergo weekly COVID-19 tests. The statewide vaccine mandate comes as schools return from the summer break amid growing concerns about the highly contagious Delta variant. From Los Angeles, here's Edith Tiantian with the details.
California is leading the way with the strictest safety guidelines for reopening schools during the coronavirus pandemic, as it became the first state in the country to require school teachers and staff to get vaccinated or undergo weekly COVID-19 testing.
We think this is the right thing to do, and we think this is a sustainable way to keeping our schools open and to address the number one anxiety that parents like myself have. I have 4 young children, and that is knowing that the schools are doing everything in their power to keep our kids safe, to keep our kids healthy. And that's what we're doing here in the state of California.
The new policy applies to more than 800,000 employees in both public and private schools. Aside from teachers, it also affects school staff, including cafeteria workers, cleaners, and bus drivers. Support from the labor unions helped ease some of the controversy around California's vaccine mandate.
We will be testing all students and staff, regardless of their vaccination status, when the new school year starts. Remember that ultimately, the greatest protection against the Delta variant continues to be vaccination. We encourage everyone who is eligible to get vaccinated.
The same message has been echoed by California Teachers Association, who said the vast majority of their teachers had already been vaccinated. The highly infectious Delta variant has recently triggered an uptick in COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations.
Particularly when we began to see, however, this Delta surge in the last few weeks, I think that for a lot of individuals that really changed their mind. I think they really started to understand that the risk was going to remain. They saw the stories of younger people being hospitalized, people who are unvaccinated losing their lives.
Long after its adoption in California, even the statewide mask mandates remain a divisive topic in states like Texas and Florida, where some regional school districts are fighting for it against the will of their governors. Although for some states a vaccine mandate seems far from likely, the recent full approval of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine by the Food and Drug Administration could encourage more teachers and staff to get the jab. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
On to Germany now. Another round of train strikes there is causing a nasty travel nightmare. Unions and the nation's rail operator, Deutsche Bahn, are struggling to come to some sort of agreement over employee compensation. Ryan Thompson has his update from Frankfurt.
Germany's railway network is once again at a standstill. Hundreds of trains cancelled, the ones running full to the brim. It's painful timing for millions of travelers hoping to enjoy August holidays.
This is crazy with the trains. When they're canceled, they give us notices, but then there's no way to figure out how to get to go.
I don't know if I'm going to catch my train today. There seems to be a Ersatz train at 2:14, so let's see if I manage to come to Berlin.
It's not really clear what's happened if they change the train. Everybody's looking around, what do we do now?
The reduced schedule is the result of an ongoing labor dispute between unions and the national railway operator Deutsche Bahn. It comes less than 2 weeks after an initial strike caused similar hassles. And still today, the nation's largest railway union says negotiations are at a standoff.
They must make a move, as is customary in wage negotiations. They must put a respectable offer on the table, and that's when we are ready to negotiate.
So jedenfalls nicht. At the center of the dispute, questions over a coronavirus bonus for staffers. Similar payments have been made by other national railroads. The Deutsche Bahn says they're willing to pay up.
This second strike is even more unnecessary than the first one. We want to talk about a coronavirus bonus during the negotiations, which would come into effect this year even. At the same time, we call on the union to call off the passenger train strikes.
And it's looking increasingly unlikely that these negotiations will be resolved at any point during these strikes. The action actually started on Saturday with cargo trains and was extended to passenger services on Monday. They are set to eventually wrap up in the early hours of Wednesday morning, but it seems likely that more demonstrations will be on the horizon sometime soon. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Frankfurt.
Tech is transforming every aspect of our lives. We've got smart factories, a lot more accessible fintech, and now you've got canteens powered by some pretty advanced algorithms. Yang Junyi explores that on What's Hot.
Steamed, fried, or baked, all the food in this Changning District canteen is prepared by an AI cooking system. Hungry diners only need to put an empty bowl or plate in the right spot to place their order. The cashiers are also AI-based. Customers pay for their lunch by putting it under a camera, which does the scan and shows the price. Everyone seems to like the service and the meals.
Children like seeing the yellow robot cooking noodles. I brought my father here too, and he also enjoyed the noodles because they are well cooked.
The food here is clean and high quality. I choose whatever I like and it tastes good.
The AI system also keeps track of what dishes are ordered and tells the robots to get ready in advance for the most popular ones. It's enabled the canteen to cut its staff by more than 50%, and the designer says there are plans for a good many more installations like this one.
We are going to be working with schools, hospitals, and factories. By the end of the year, there will be dozens of canteens opened using the system. Some catering companies also want to use our system to improve their kitchen, as the no-touch system and equipment can support COVID-19 prevention.
Of course, it's not just a heightened desire for contactless interaction that increases the demand for AI technology. Many companies have started using AI now because it frees up time for workers trapped in repetitive tasks ripe for automation. Experts caution, however, that since AI applications like this are based on a large quantity of collected data, protecting that data and managing it properly inevitably becomes an issue.
We have seen burgeoning applications of AI in many sectors, but the development of AI technology depends on data collected by the applications, and some of that could be private information. So many companies are also working on how to use AI while protecting the privacy of individuals.
On Friday, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress passed China's first private information protection law to prevent businesses from collecting sensitive personal data and to crack down on crimes like online fraud and data theft. The law takes effect in November. Yang Junyi, ICS for CGTN Shanghai.
A quick run through commodity prices now. Spot platinum prices slipping under $1,000 an ounce yet again in today's session. But another member of that platinum group of metals family, rhodium, has had a pretty good run so far this year. In fact, prices on rhodium did come close to $29,900 an ounce in March. They've fallen by about 40% since then, still relatively high at around $17,000 an ounce. And that does translate into a decent bounty for PGM miners in South Africa. Here's what's coming up next. Tunisia is lauding Chinese firms' contribution to the digital economy in the country. Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business. One last story for you in the hour. The Chinese tech firm Huawei will build an innovation and research center in Tunisia. That's according to the head of the company's North Africa region, Terry He. He made that announcement during a meeting with the country's president, Kais Saied. During that meeting, the Huawei official indicated that Tunisia, in the company's view, has all the necessary criteria to become a tech hub on the continent. CGTN's Adin Chouachi has that report from Tunis.
In a meeting held at Carthage Palace in the Tunisian capital, the head of state welcomed the opportunities for partnership between Tunisia and China. President Kais Saied stressed his commitment to strengthen this partnership, particularly in the sectors of education, teaching, transport and health. Experts have also lauded Chinese companies' contribution to the North African state's digital economy.
I think the president's side meeting with the chairman of Huawei North Africa region at this time carries the message that Tunisia seeks to develop and expand its partnership with China's companies, bearing in mind that China is a world economic and technological power.
The president of Huawei Northern Africa region announced the creation of a research, development and innovation center in Tunisia and said it's likely to become a technology hub in Africa. Tunisian experts say digitalization is a catalyst for economic growth in the country.
Developing the relations between Tunisia and Huawei in search and G5 technology will definitely bring great benefits to both parties. We should not forget that Tunisia is the gateway of Africa with an excellent and empowered generation of engineers.
The Huawei official also said his company is committed to continue supporting Tunisia through contributing in particular to the implementation of the medical city in Kharwan, the creation of jobs and skills training.
Huawei's support to Tunisia is endless. The new partnership agreement will allow for the creation of new job opportunities. Huawei is a world technology and innovation leader. It will help create competitive companies in the technology sector in Tunisia.
According to the Tunisian presidency, the Chinese multinational telecommunications equipment and services company is also willing to expand partnerships with universities and educational institutions throughout Tunisia and equip them with computer labs. Technology experts assert that Huawei is contributing to digital transformation in the world through modern infrastructure and ICT solutions. The Chinese company is also sharing its experience with many countries in order to boost the ICT ecosystem by offering new services. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Quick update on the currencies. Let's focus on Ghana, specifically the cedi. That currency does continue to decline against the American dollar even today. It's at a record low, 6.0375 to the dollar, and that's despite a record size of dollars coming through from the central bank at its most recent auction. The Bank of Ghana sold some $75 million in its forward rate auction on the 24th of August. That is the largest lot size offered by the central bank since it started doing these forward rate auctions in 2019. That's where we wrap up this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the programme in the last hour. There are many ways to get your feedback back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.